I know they're making a difference because we get to see the difference they make. But we're going to start with thinking about building a better Bennington from the ground up. And we're going to have, I'm so pleased to have Jason Dolmetsch start us off with that. I have known Jason almost as long as his parents have known Jason. You know, when we talk about wanting the youth to come and stay here and do great things, Jason is a wonderful example of that. He has built a thriving business that makes a big difference to all the different projects that are going on, along with all the infrastructure that we need within Bennington. You know, I wouldn't have such a great septic system today if Jason wasn't here to work on it. But so Jason owns MSK Engineering and is a partner in the Goldstone Architecture. He's also been on the board of directors for the Sage City Syndicate. He's co-chaired the Bennington County Regional Economic Development Group, which turned into, we like a lot of words when we form groups in Southern Vermont, Southern Vermont Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy with Windham County.
Right off the tongue.
One of his most important accomplishments is that he married Alex Jones, who is the operations director at the museum. And together, they have a wonderful daughter, Lena, who is a better skier than Jason is, and who his barber just said is more extroverted than Jason was at his age. See the joy of living in a town forever? You get to have your history constantly put in front of you. It was my extreme pleasure to have him as a pre-K student and a kindergarten student when I taught at Bennington College Early Childhood Center, and I just told him that there were three things that I remember about those days. One is that we had this wonderful room filled with blocks, and I could never get Jason out of it, right, Sally? She goes back as far as I go back with Jason. He loved the block room, and we let the kids build with those blocks all week long, and on Fridays it was a big day to put those blocks away. You know, it was difficult for everybody to knock down everything they had built. And he loved Legos, really into Legos. And the other thing was he hated naps. And you know, as a preschool teacher, you live for nap time, let me tell you. And so I would have to kind of con him and say, just stay on your mat for me, okay? Here's a bunch of books, read the books and just stay on your mat. Well, we often tell parents in the early childhood world, the things that you are being driven crazy by your young child will become their best assets later on in life. And so for Jason, his energy, his love of being able to build things, his love of being able to make a better world has brought him and made him stay in Bennington. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys asking me to speak today. I have really poor, sketchy handwriting. I've been thinking about the request that Betsy gave to me a couple of weeks ago, and I've been very challenged. So, of course, naturally, I waited till the very last minute to put my thoughts down on paper. And I would only add that despite being inclusive of my love of blocks, I also loved bulldozers when I was a child. I would always get onto excavators and different types of bulldozers when I was 5. That was like my absolute favorite thing to do. So I never really strayed that far from that. So what Betsy asked me here to, what she defined for me what to speak about was to share my story about how my business has become so successful, and to share some ideas of how to build a better Bennington from the ground up. So firstly, to introduce myself, I think I know most of you probably know me for as long as Betsy's known me too. So I am the sole owner of MSK Engineering and a partner in Goldstone Architecture. MSK was founded in 1994 by Jim Secor and Kip McDonald as an offshoot of McDonald Secor Associates. We all remember those days back in my childhood. I was hired as an intern in 1998 at the age of 17, working at MSK. Fast forwarding, in 2012, I helped my friend Jeff Goldstone start Goldstone Architecture. And at the end of 2015, I became the sole owner of MSK Engineering. And at the time, both companies, which share a single office, had 4 full-time employees, including Jeff and myself. Today, we currently employ 23 full-time employees, 3 part-time, and we employ approximately 5 seasonal interns who are generally from either regional engineering schools or actually from Bennington College as well. MSK's median age, did this math, of its full-time employees is 35. We collectively have 13 school-aged children or infants in the region, and including our part-time staff, our ages range from 22 to 74. We employ 4 recent college graduates from RPI, from University of Massachusetts at Amherst, from Vermont Technical College, and from Bennington College. We have 4 licensed engineers and surveyors on staff, and 3 semi-retired professionals. One of whom I just recently brought on, who's a geotechnical engineer who's got 50 years of experience working all up and down the East Coast. It's a really great honor to have him. So when you we were talking at lunch earlier, I was listening to people talking about like the over 60 crowd, like having a group basically about how to employ yourself after you finish your full-time work. And I think what I'm doing with Peter is I know that his time and energy is still exuberant but limited, and that we really enjoy engaging on that level with our staff. So 45% of our workforce was born locally, and the remaining 55% came from region like Massachusetts, Connecticut, but also Nova Scotia, New Mexico, and Montana. Collectively, our offices generate $1.5 million in direct wages. All of whom work in the urban core, and we provide 100% health insurance premiums to our employees, and the average or the median salary for our full-time employees is $74,000. So our projects are largely regional. We primarily support nearby municipalities and community institutions. Our largest projects are probably well known for our water distribution on the MSK side. We were the lead engineers for the expansion of the water lines for the PFOA contamination in town. And we've been spearheading the lead service line detection and replacement program that's going on in downtown Bennington. Those 2 projects we have generated, for better or for worse, are going to generate approximately $35 million in local economic activity, all of whose funding sources are coming completely outside of the region. Goldstone's largest works are generally in community infrastructure. They're in affordable housing and early childhood ed. And I was not able to ask Jeff how much our current project workload is for those types of projects, but those are also very much funded from outside sources and generate $1 million in revenue. So we really are like to be involved in community investment and local economic development. So that's who we are. But I guess I'm here to answer the question, how do we become so successful, and what are my thoughts on how we can build a better Bennington from the ground up? And so to answer the first question, I would say I don't yet know if we're successful. But we are definitely in the process of going somewhere. And I think I would rather answer the question of where we got where we are today. And to answer that, I think it really was 3 key factors. And one was a focus on building and maintaining meaningful relationships, a willingness to accept risk, and a commitment to seeking outside perspective. So on relationships, one of the foundations of my engineering technical experiences came from working on Bennington's water system. And that work started very modestly over a decade ago with the then Water Resources Superintendent Terry Morse. And at the time, we started working together. I was 27, and he was completing a particularly challenging water treatment plant upgrade with another engineering firm. And it was challenging for many reasons, but one of the things that Terry spoke about during that time was he really felt like the consulting firm he was working for did not advocate for him or create systems that worked for them. And at some point along the way, without my noticing, Terry decided he was done with working with engineering firms from 3 hours away, and he started throwing me a lot of work. He was a very demanding customer, and it was through that work that I learned some of my most valuable skills. Not least of which was to learn how to hit above my own weight and to meet clients where they were, as opposed to knowing my stock of services and trying to find clients to serve to them. And it was through that decade of work with Terry that strength of that relationship that allowed us, MSK, to help Bennington at a very critical time when we had both a major health crisis in the water system and a series of really critical key retirements going on. So we were able to bridge that gap for them. And that we took on the burden of the emergency project almost solely. And as the new Deputy Director of Public Works came on, we were also able to add continuity to the experience and practices that had been going on for so long. And so it was a deep, important partnership that we formed. And I think it was a way that I was able to give back. So in many ways, that single relationship formed the basis of what I value in my clients, right? We most value engineering, engaging with clients where we can form long-lasting partnerships and who we can have a direct impact on community infrastructure. So on risk, so I'll start by saying that Vermont is a resilient state, right? But on the whole, it's pretty risk averse. And aversion to risk, I think, benefits Vermont's resiliency. But too much risk aversion makes us blind to opportunities when they present themselves. And if I don't have to, fortunately, if I had to write a dating profile, I'd write, I like fantasizing about future conditions and taking planned and managed risks. So all I'm saying is allow yourself to think big. Provide the opportunity to think beyond what is in front of you. But be disciplined about how you will get there. So, or another example is don't buy lottery tickets because you think you'll win. Buy them early enough so you have time to plan how you will use the money to accomplish your goals. So two of the biggest inhibitors to imagining a future condition, I think, are fear and time. And one must create time and a safe space in order to plan. And an example of this in my business work was actually the year I took over at MSK was really difficult for me. I was coming off, it was 2015. You know, if we can remember that far back, and actually 2014 was almost as bad as 2008. It was a really economically challenging time, and I really felt like I had economically and professionally stagnated, on top of the fact that my partner of 15 years or 20 years had notified me that he wanted to be out in 3 years. And I really couldn't visualize at that moment how we were going to function without him. So I knew I needed to do something else, but I didn't know what it was or how to get there. And at my lowest point in this whole process was my sister, who's also my accountant, and now my finance director. This is Vermont. There really aren't enough people to do everything, and we're all related. So she really encouraged me to make a financial model, because I can only see through things through numbers, of my ideal company and how much it would cost and how much revenue I might have to generate in order to support that company. And at that point, I made a model that envisioned a full-time staff of 7. And I thought it was pure fantasy. But a year after that, conditions presented themselves such that after I took over the company, I had filled every position that I had envisioned, largely with people I did not know when I created my lab. And now we're 3 times the size of my fantasy company, and we generate 4 times the revenue of the company I bought. And what I learned from that progression was that fantasy planning doesn't mean it will happen, right? But that when conditions present themselves, you know what the opportunity looks like. And suddenly, big risks don't look so risky anymore. So fantasy planning, in summary, is how you lower the risk of the activity and allowing yourself to take time to train. So lastly, the outside perspective. So for me, seeking outside perspective has really been critical to my own sort of personal transformation and the growth of this organization that I never really imagined. And chiefly, I think the change, my personal shift, was on the value and utility of work, right? So my view of work for the longest time has been, I think, largely in the Vermont paradigm, which is that devil makes work for idle hands, right? And here we value people based on the work that they do, right? And the work ethic that they have, and on productivity. And I think about, like, the example is, we don't actually talk about the weather here, right? Like, we sort of, it's nice to know what's outside, and every now, it was sunny a little while ago, now it's changed. But we ask, the first thing we say is, how are you? And most people's response is, busy. Or, how are you? You must be busy. And I think here's what I've learned through the process of building a company, that hard work is really important to achieving to organization's success. But executive function, the ability to make decisions and plan for future conditions, is the most important asset a company has when it's in a growth phase. So when I bought MSK in 2015, I was the most productive employee in terms of revenue of the company. And that at that time, there was a direct correlation between my effort and the company's revenue. Today, I am the least productive member of my company. And in many ways, I had to learn not to work. In fact, I think now, if I were to look deep enough, there's a reverse correlation between my input, my direct input into the company, and my company's health. So that if I'm working, I don't have time for development and maintaining relationships, mentoring staff, and planning for the future. So my new perspective, so how does this relate to outside perspective? And it was really born, a lot of this idea was born out of the work that I did with a management consultant I hired, Mr. Michael Keene. And so as an individual with experiences outside my own firm, he's an individual that is outside the firm, and he also, a lot of his professional work has been outside of the region, working with companies, that he was able to sort of retrain me into seeing what was, how to value myself and my contribution to the community and to my organization. And I think he was really able to reframe what I should value as a contributor. So in the end, I would say I reject the cult of hard work, right? Meaning hard work is really important to achieving your goals, but it's not the goal or value itself on its own, right? What we achieve together is what is most important, and as larger organizations grow, the more executive function is required to be successful. So meaning people at the top need more, less structured time to play with blocks. So the question is, how do we build a better Bennington from the ground up? First, we're in process, right? We are doing it. We aren't starting today. This is already happening. And I think it's really important that, and I'm speaking to the choir here. You guys are all, this whole place is based on service, right? But there are so many individuals in this community that are doing really, really important development work with really limited time and limited resources. And I think it's a great foundation on which to build. And I think the same thing is continue to value relationships, right? Put trust and support in community institutions and individuals. And continue to support, encourage, manage risk-taking by individuals and community institutions, right? Push to think big. And seek and value outside perspective. Now, how many of us were born here? Okay, that's great. I thought there was going to be a lot more. I remember I went to the BCRC annual dinner. There was 120 people there, and one of the keynote speakers said, "How many people were born here?" And I was like, "Me," and one other person that I couldn't see. So I think for those of you who are not born here, I think it's really important to realize the value in perspective that you have coming from elsewhere, right? I think that what I often see is a reframing of the things that we value here, right? People teach us what we already know, right? And we are resilient. We are conservationists, right? But you know, I didn't know how to walk down Fifth Avenue, right? I didn't know how to use the New York subway system. I didn't know about, you know, there are lots of ideas that I learned from somebody else's perspective from not in here. So when we work and when we talk, when we as locals or we as outsiders, people not outsiders, but people on the inside that have outside perspective, like we both can learn from each other, right? Don't teach the natives how to weave baskets, right? We know how to weave our baskets, right? Teach me how to use the subway system and get to JFK Airport, right? Because that's what I need to know, right? That was what was so influential. And then lastly, I would say think regionally. Really think regionally. And that means that we are both, you know, we talk about the shires, right? We talk about South Shire and North Shire. We also are, but more importantly, we are both Southern Vermont and we are Capital District, right? We are both of those things. And so I think it's really, really important to understand that our borders are so porous, right? Like my mother has still not forgiven me for being the only person born in Vermont and the only family member that lives in New York State. But I refuse to believe that reduces my value as a community member, right? And in fact, I know I live in White Creek. It's more rural than Bennington. But it still affords me perspective, right? And I reject the border. I believe we are both. And I think we just did a retreat. We did a retreat with my senior staff, and we went to Troy. We went to downtown Troy for 2 days, and it was awesome. And I think you really have to do that. You have to yank yourself out of here, because what it does is it helps you, it provides you with the perspective that you need to both see what we have that's great and also see what other people are doing just as well or better, right? So always look for perspective. Anyway, I really appreciate your willingness to listen to me, and I really thank you for the opportunity to make me put these ideas down. So
good. We have 1 minute left for questions.
Okay.
Are you involved with the apartment project?
Yes, we're the civil engineers.
Yeah.
Kathy.
I just want to say, listening to you talk, it sort of mirrors myself, because years ago, I was the top producer where I was working, and then I go out on my own, and now I directly do not bring in any income. My agents do, and I'm also working with my own top producer for my 3 to 5 year exit plan. So it's like, wow, you just described me. So I should know.
Good job.
You're
Good
doing
job.
it.
Congratulations.
Good job.
Any other questions for Jason?
Well, you know, I would just say, you know, you don't give chores of your space, Jason, but you're in the old Bennington station. What we all know, we often have eaten at many of the computer hutches that you have there. But it is an amazing business when you walk into it and see the sea. Just imagine this room filled with computers and young people working hard at them all. It is amazing to see how you have built your business and been able to employ people from both locally and further. Because we have a workforce problem here in Bennington County, right? And you've worked really hard to build a workforce that has a technical skill that's not always easy to find, too.
Well, we've been fortunate.